Welcome to another deep dive. I've always found the connection between art and family to be just incredibly fascinating. And today we're going to really explore that intersection, specifically how art therapy can shed light on those often hidden dynamics within families.
Absolutely. And we've got a really fantastic resource to guide us on this deep dive, Family Art Therapy Foundations of Theory and Practice. It's uh it's remarkably comprehensive, covering everything from how families have been depicted in art throughout history to the specific techniques and theoretical models used by art therapists today.
It's really amazing how much ground this book covers. And, our goal here is to kind of distill the essence of family art therapy, helping you understand not just the mechanics of it, but also its origins and the different ways it's applied in practice. So we're aiming for those aha moments that make you see family dynamics in a whole new light, all without getting lost in a bunch of jargon.
Exactly. We want this to be accessible and insightful. And the book really starts off by taking us on a kind of historical journey, looking at how art through the ages has mirrored family life, which I think is a really brilliant way to set the stage.
Yeah, it's like looking through a window into different cultures and time periods. I mean, the book highlights how art from ancient Egypt and Rome all the way through the Renaissance and into the 20th century, it offers these visual clues about societal values and the roles that different family members played. And that's where we start to see how the very concept of family itself has evolved.
It's quite striking to see those shifts. One example that really stood out to me was the Roman concept of concordia, which is often depicted in their art. Now, it emphasized harmony within the family unit. That's husband, wife, children, even household servants. But it's not quite the same as our modern understanding of emotional intimacy.
Yeah, the book makes that distinction, doesn't it? It points out that while the Romans certainly valued familial bonds, their expression of those feelings was often a bit more reserved, more focused on duty and maintaining a well-ordered household. It wasn't necessarily about those deep, emotionally expressive connections that we often prioritize today.
Exactly. Bradley, who's quoted in the book, puts it really well, saying that their view of familial relatedness implied a calm and stable agreement, but without the same level of romance or intimacy that we might associate with family now. It's also fascinating to consider how much emphasis they placed on children as a way to continue their lineage. It's a really different perspective.
Totally. And the book mentions that while children were definitely cared for, their upbringing could be quite strict.
Mhm.
There's this analysis of a stone wall relief from a Roman cemetery that really exemplifies this. It depicts a family with 6 children, and what's striking is how the artist has arranged them.
Oh, absolutely. The father is positioned very clearly as the dominant figure, which aligns perfectly with the patriarchal structure of the Roman family. And, the formality of the relief itself, it kind of reinforces that sense of reserved family life that we are talking about.
Right. And to really delve into the meaning of these historical family images, the book talks about using different analytical approaches like structural analysis, formalistic analysis, and a connoisseurial approach. Could you
Mhm.
kind of break down what each of these entails?
Sure. Structuralism, in this context, looks at the artwork as a reflection of the broader social organization and kinship patterns. It's about deciphering those cultural codes embedded in the art. So, for example, in that Roman relief, we see the patriarchal structure reflected. Then you have formalistic analysis, which focuses more on the artwork's elements themselves, the composition, use of color, light, and shadow, how these all work together to create a unified piece.
So it's less about the social context and more about the artistic techniques being used.
Exactly. And finally, the connoisseurial approach incorporates the study of iconography and symbolic meanings. So it considers the artist's intended message, the themes they were exploring, and any symbols that might represent specific people, ideas, or concepts. It's about understanding the artist's creative process, both the conscious and unconscious influences that might be at play.
I see. So by using these different lenses, we can gain a much deeper understanding of not only how families were depicted, but also what those depictions reveal about the societal values and even the artist's intentions. It's like peeling back the layers of history through art.
Right, it's a multifaceted approach. And speaking of historical shifts, the book then takes us to the Renaissance, which marked a real turning point in how family was perceived and structured.
Absolutely. And, I think a lot of that had to do with the significant changes happening in society at the time. The economic growth, the revival of classical ideals, families moving to urban centers. Women were also starting to be seen as more than just wives and mothers, although they still very much remained under the authority of their husbands.
Definitely. And Rembrandt's The Return of the Prodigal Son is a really fantastic example from this period. The book analyzes it from both a structural and formalistic perspective. Structurally, it's interesting how Rembrandt, though depicting a religious story, manages to capture this incredible sense of intimate connection and emotional depth between the father and son.
It really speaks to that universal experience of family, doesn't it? I mean, regardless of your background, there's something about that image that resonates on a deeply emotional level.
Absolutely. And from a formalistic standpoint, Rembrandt's masterful use of chiaroscuro, that interplay of light and dark, it just creates this incredible sense of unity and almost spiritual connection between the figures. It's really striking when you compare it to earlier Renaissance art, which often depicted figures in a more linear and isolated way.
So there's this shift happening, both in how families were being depicted and in the artistic techniques themselves. Then we fast forward to a much more modern time with Henry Moore's Family Group, a sculpture from the mid-20th century. I'm curious, what does this more abstract piece tell us about the evolution of family?
Well, structurally, Moore's sculpture, which he created after World War II, presents a much more contemporary view of the family unit. It captures the relational dynamics, but there's a sense of egalitarianism there, a move away from the strictly hierarchical depictions of the past. And from a connoisseurial perspective, it's almost like Moore is making a statement about the importance of family, particularly the nurturing role of parents, especially in the aftermath of such global conflict.
I love how the book describes art as this enduring spirit container of human experience. I mean, it really drives home the point that art isn't just about aesthetics, it's about capturing and conveying the essence of who we are, both individually and collectively.
Absolutely. And, that understanding of historical and social context really lays the groundwork for understanding how family art therapy itself emerged as a distinct field. And that shift was a really significant one in how we view human behavior.
Right. It marked a move away from solely focusing on an individual's internal psychology towards seeing the family as an interconnected system. So it became less about asking why someone was behaving in a certain way and more about understanding the what was happening within the family context that was contributing to those behaviors.
Exactly. And while past experiences and family of origin issues are certainly considered, the primary focus of family therapy is on the present, on understanding those patterns within the family system that might be maintaining the problem. And then, of course, the goal is to find ways to shift those patterns to create a more functional dynamic.
And a lot of that shift in thinking was influenced by the rise of cybernetics and communication theory, right? The book specifically mentions the Palo Alto Project and the double bind theory. I have to admit, those are a little outside my area of expertise. Can you break them down for me?
Sure. Think of cybernetics as the study of systems, how they regulate themselves through feedback loops. And in family therapy, that translates to looking at how families establish rules, patterns of interaction, and feedback mechanisms to maintain a sense of stability. The challenge arises when those patterns become rigid or unproductive, locking the family into a cycle of dysfunction. And the Palo Alto Project, which was led by Gregory Bateson, was really groundbreaking in terms of understanding human communication, especially the nuances and inconsistencies that can occur between what we say and how we say it.
Ah, and that leads us to the double bind theory, which I know is initially proposed as a potential explanation for schizophrenia, but the book clarifies it's been largely disregarded as a valid theory in that regard due to the understanding of the biological factors underlying the condition.
Right, the double bind theory was developed in the 1950s, and while its application to schizophrenia is no longer considered accurate, it was significant because it highlighted how contradictory communication within families can lead to real psychological distress. It proposed that when a person is repeatedly trapped in situations where they receive two conflicting messages from someone they're dependent on, and they can't comment on or escape this contradiction, it can lead to significant emotional and psychological problems. So while the theory itself has evolved, it was really important in shaping how we view communication dynamics within families. I can see how that would be incredibly confusing and stressful for anyone, especially a child. And the book mentions that strategic family therapy emerged from this communication model, with Jay Haley and his work at the Mental Research Institute playing a key role. What was his main focus? Haley was really interested in the power dynamics within relationships and how communication patterns can be used to maintain control. He observed that every interaction involves a subtle negotiation of who defines the relationship, who sets the terms, And he suggested that sometimes symptoms could be a way for a person to exert a form of control, even if it seemed like they were lacking control over the symptoms themselves.
Hmm.
This focus on control became a central tenet of strategic therapy.
So it's almost like a paradoxical situation where the symptom gives the person a certain type of power within the family system. And from there, family therapy really started to branch out, didn't it? The book introduces a whole array of different theoretical approaches: strategic, Bowenian, experiential, structural. It seems like a really diverse field.
It is. And each of these approaches offers a unique perspective on family dynamics. Strategic therapy, as we discussed, focuses on understanding and modifying those communication and control patterns, often using paradoxical interventions to disrupt those patterns and create change. Bowenian family systems theory, developed by Murray Bowen, places a lot of emphasis on understanding emotional reactivity across generations and this idea of differentiation of self, which is basically the ability to separate your own thoughts and feelings from those of others. He also introduced key concepts like the multi-generational transmission process, explaining how unresolved emotional patterns can be passed down through families, and emotional triangles, where tension between two people often pulls in a third person to stabilize the relationship.
So Bowen's work often involved exploring those family of origin issues to understand how past patterns might be playing out in the present.
Precisely. Then we have experiential therapy, with figures like Carl Whitaker, who is known for his very spontaneous and sometimes unconventional approach, aimed at really fostering emotional expression and personal growth within the family. Other experiential therapists, like David Cantor and Fred and Bunny Ewell, developed expressive techniques like family sculpting, where family members physically position each other in space to represent the power dynamics and emotional closeness or distance within the family.
Family sculpting sounds incredibly powerful, especially because it bypasses the need to put those dynamics into words. What about structural family therapy? That was really shaped by Salvador Minuchin, right?
Yes. Minuchin developed a very comprehensive model that focuses on the family's organizational structure, its boundaries, those rules that govern interactions both within the family and with the outside world, and its hierarchical arrangement. The goal of therapy is often to restructure those boundaries and hierarchies to create a more functional family system. He also emphasized the idea that families have subsystems within them, like the spousal subsystem or the parental subsystem, and that those subsystems need clear boundaries to function effectively.
It makes sense that clear boundaries would be essential for healthy family functioning. The book also touches on Adlerian therapy and narrative therapy. How do those approaches contribute to the landscape of family therapy?
Adlerian therapy, based on Alfred Adler's work, focuses on understanding the family's lifestyle patterns, those habitual ways of interacting and coping with challenges that they've developed over time. It emphasizes building encouragement and a sense of belonging within the family unit. And narrative therapy, largely associated with Michael White and David Epstein, takes a social constructivist perspective. It focuses on how families create meaning through the stories they tell about themselves and their experiences. And the therapist helps the family to externalize problems, seeing them as separate from the individuals involved, and then to reauthor those narratives in more empowering and hopeful ways.
It's incredible how many different ways there are to approach family dynamics. But now let's dive into how art therapy specifically integrates into this already diverse field. The book credits Hanna Kwiatkowska as a real pioneer in this area.
Absolutely. Kwiatkowska was one of the first to systematically use art making as a therapeutic tool with entire families. Her work in the 1960s really laid the groundwork for the development of family art therapy as we know it today.
And it's not just about having families create art freely, right? I mean, there are specific assessments and directives that are used in clinical practice.
Oh, absolutely. One of the most widely used techniques is the kinetic family drawing, or KFD, which is often used with children. They're simply asked to draw their family doing something together. And you'd be amazed by how much insight can be gleaned from that seemingly simple task. You can learn a lot about their self-perception within the family and the quality of their relationships with other members.
It's fascinating how much can be revealed through nonverbal expression. And Robert Burns developed the family-centered circle drawings, or FCCD, which I understand is a way to assess parent-child relationships across all ages.
Right. It involves having clients draw symbols in and around circles that represent their family members and the relationships between them. Then there are specific techniques developed by figures like Helen Barbara Landgarden and Shirley Riley. Landgarden, who actually wrote the foreword to this book, integrated a lot of different theoretical approaches, but found structural family therapy to be particularly effective. And Riley was known for her very integrative approach, drawing from structural, strategic, social constructivist, and other models, emphasizing both the process of art making and the final product.
And beyond those specific assessments, what other art-based tools are used in family therapy?
Well, creative genograms and family timelines are really powerful ways to explore family history and patterns that span generations. And unlike traditional genograms, which rely on standardized symbols, creative genograms allow for much more personal and artistic expression. Family timelines provide a way to visually map out key moments and transitions that the family has experienced. And the book also mentions the use of creating childhood family masks and having clients create art that represents their family's overall approach to life, a sort of family motto or crest, if you will.
I love that, a family crest. It's like encapsulating the essence of the family's identity. Now, I'm really curious to hear about some real-world applications of all this. How is family art therapy actually being used to help families navigate challenges and work through difficult situations?
The book is full of really compelling examples. One that really stood out to me was how family art therapy was used in the aftermath of 9/11 to help families cope with grief and loss. There's a story about a widow and her son who collaboratively created a drawing that symbolized their connection and the importance of their relationship in the face of such profound tragedy.
That's a really powerful image, and it speaks to how art therapy can provide a nonverbal outlet for emotions that might be too overwhelming or difficult to articulate verbally. It's like art becomes a bridge between the internal world and the external world.
Exactly. And the book also discusses how family art therapy can be used to explore family of origin issues, helping individuals gain a deeper understanding of how their past experiences continue to shape their present relationships. It also delves into its role in understanding the attachment between mothers and infants, even referencing Winnicott's concept of potential space, that transitional realm where play and creativity foster connection. There's a description of the Mother-Infant Creative Growth Program, which used sensory motor-based art activities to strengthen that early bond between adolescent mothers and their babies. It's amazing how powerful those early connections are and how creative expression can support them.
It really is. The book also mentions its applications in blended families and during career transitions. How does art therapy provide support in those specific situations?
Well, in blended families, art can be a really valuable tool for helping to create a shared family narrative. It can be used to visually represent the new family structure, explore those evolving boundaries, and address any feelings of displacement or conflict that might arise. And during career transitions, art can offer a safe space to process all the anxieties and uncertainties that come with those changes. It can also help families visualize new possibilities and maintain a sense of connection amidst all the change.
And I remember reading about a case study that illustrated how structural family art therapy techniques, like boundary making and unbalancing, were used to help a family navigate a significant career change. Could you remind me about unbalancing? What exactly does that entail?
Sure. Unbalancing is a technique where the therapist intentionally sides with one family member, kind of disrupting the existing power dynamic in order to facilitate change. It's a strategic intervention aimed at shaking things up a bit and prompting new ways of interacting. The book also discusses experiential approaches like family sculpting and dramatic reenactments, which allow families to engage with their relational patterns in a more physical and emotional way. There's a really moving example of a family using sculpting to express feelings of failure and disharmony within the family system. It's really powerful.
It sounds like it. And
Yes.
I was particularly moved by the narrative art therapy case study that focused on the internment of Japanese Americans during World War II. It's just such a poignant example of how art can be used to process trauma and advocate for social justice.
It really is. It beautifully illustrates the concepts of externalization and reauthoring. The participants in the study were invited to create art about their experiences during internment, and that process helped them to separate the problem, the injustice they faced, from their own sense of self-worth. It allowed them to shift from internalized feelings of blame and shame to an understanding that what happened to them was a result of external forces, a historical injustice. And the redress movement itself is a powerful example of externalizing the problem. It's not about blaming individuals. It's about acknowledging and addressing a systemic wrong.
And the art directives they used, like asking participants to draw their families during internment and reflect on any wisdom they gained from that experience, those were such powerful ways for them to break through years of silence and process their trauma in a tangible and meaningful way.
Absolutely. And finally, the book explores filial art therapy, which is a model where parents are actually trained to conduct art therapy sessions with their own children at home.
I find that really fascinating. It's like empowering parents to become therapeutic agents within their own families, utilizing the power of art. And if I remember correctly, it draws on the work of Carl Rogers and Bernard Gurney, emphasizing the importance of the parent providing a really safe and accepting space for the child's creative expression to unfold.
Exactly. The primary goals of filial art therapy are strengthening the parent-child relationship, helping the parent develop empathy for their child's inner world, and fostering the child's self-confidence through undivided attention and the freedom to make choices in their art making. And the process usually involves training sessions where the parents observe the therapist modeling non-directive art interactions with the child. Then, the therapist guides the parents in developing those essential skills like active listening, validating feelings, and supporting the child's self-expression through their art.
This has been such an incredible deep dive. I feel like we've only just scratched the surface of this incredibly rich and complex field.
We really have. It's amazing how much ground we covered, from those ancient artistic expressions of family to all the different ways art therapy is being used today to help families heal, grow, and thrive.
And there are a couple of things that really stuck with me throughout our conversation. One is the sheer amount of insight that can be gained from something as seemingly simple as a kinetic family drawing. It's a reminder that we don't always need words to understand what's happening within a family system. Sometimes those nonverbal cues can be even more revealing.
It's those subtle details that can be so telling, like the placement of figures, their size relative to each other, the actions they're engaged in, or even the lack of interaction between family members. All of those things can offer clues about the underlying dynamics.
Absolutely. And that concept of the family ledger is so powerful. This idea that there's this often unconscious accounting system within families, keeping track of who gives what, who owes what, and how those unspoken obligations can get passed down through generations. It's a real eye-opener. It makes you think about how much of our behavior might be influenced by those intergenerational patterns that we're not even fully aware of.
It's a really compelling way to frame those often invisible dynamics that shape our relationships. And the resilience of the Japanese American community during and after their internment, how they used art to process that collective trauma and fight for social justice, is such an inspiring example of the power of art to facilitate both individual and societal healing.
It's a testament to the enduring power of the human spirit and the ability of creative expression to help us make sense of even the most difficult experiences. And this deep dive has left me with a bunch of new questions. I'm wondering about the specific types of art materials that might be most effective in different therapeutic situations. Are there certain mediums that tend to elicit different emotional responses or lend themselves to particular types of expression?
That's a great question, and one that art therapists consider carefully. Different materials can evoke different sensory experiences and provide different avenues for expression. Fluid mediums like paint might encourage a more direct emotional release, while something like collage might be particularly useful for exploring fragmented experiences or integrating different parts of the self. It really depends on the individual and the therapeutic goals.
And the ethical considerations involved in using art therapy, especially with vulnerable populations, those have to be at the forefront, right?
Absolutely. Issues like confidentiality, informed consent, and being incredibly mindful of the potential for misinterpreting artwork, those are all paramount. Art therapists have a responsibility to handle those ethical considerations with sensitivity and care.
It's a delicate balance, isn't it? And I'm also really curious about the role of cultural differences in how we interpret family art. I imagine something that might be seen as a symbol of closeness in one culture could have a completely different meaning in another.
That's a crucial point. Cultural context plays a huge role in the interpretation of symbols and artistic expression. And family art therapists need to be extremely sensitive to those nuances, avoiding any imposition of their own cultural interpretations on the client's work. It's essential to have a deep understanding of the client's cultural background to ensure that the interpretations are accurate and respectful.
For those who want to learn more, exploring the work of those key figures we mentioned, Kwiatkowska, Bowen, Minuchin, White, Landgarten, that's a great starting point. And delving deeper into specific case studies and the different theoretical approaches can really enrich your understanding of this dynamic field.
Definitely. There's so much to discover and learn within the world of family art therapy.
So, as we wrap up, I'm left thinking about this idea that families are kind of like works of art themselves. Each one is unique and complex, but they also share these common underlying structures and themes. And it makes me wonder about those ghosts of systems past, those intergenerational patterns that we inherit without even realizing it. Maybe, just maybe, engaging in creative expression, much like the art we've been discussing, could be a way to connect with those unseen influences, understand them better, and perhaps even find ways to rewrite those narratives in a more positive and empowering way. It's definitely something to ponder.
It is. And on that note, we conclude our deep dive into the world of family art therapy. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for listening.